When you think about history, are there lots of old guys wearing wigs and stockings? When you think about history, is Napoleon really short? And folks have wooden teeth. Do you know that history can be the most incredible, amazing stories for you and me? Sit back and listen to a story right now. It's honest, it's fun, and it's sure to.
Hi, young historians. Welcome to another episode of Anytime Now. I'm Brooke, co-founder of Honest History. Are you as excited about this episode as I am? I sure hope so. We're about to dive into another story-filled adventure and learn something new. And remember, by learning more about the past, you can make a positive impact on the future. So pack your bags and let's go.
Napoleon Bonaparte, the Emperor of the French. At one point, he was the most powerful man in Europe. His army seemed invincible, winning battle after battle. It appeared as if nothing could stop him, until the emperor made the greatest misstep of his career. In 1812, Napoleon led the largest army Europe had ever seen on a daring invasion into Russia. A decision that would prove to be a costly mistake, and one historians have been talking about for over a century. This is the story of Napoleon and the invasion that went terribly wrong. It was a summer day in 1807. Napoleon Bonaparte adjusted his coat as he gazed down the river. He spotted the mast of a boat sailing towards him. Napoleon, a famous general from Corsica, was now the emperor of the French. Under his rule, France's influence had spread far and wide across Europe. And in 1807, the emperor had the glow of victory about him. He had just won a battle against the Russian Empire. Now, Napoleon stood on a raft in the middle of the Niemen River, waiting for Alexander I, the Tsar of Russia. As the boat grew closer, Napoleon spotted a man with light auburn hair. Alexander stepped off the ship and onto the raft to greet the French emperor. The two men were there to sign a peace treaty. That day, in the middle of the Niemen River, France and Russia agreed to lay down their weapons. They would be allies as they expanded their empires. It was the beginning of an unexpected friendship between the two rulers. But, as the years went by, their relationship began to sour. In 1810, Alexander opened trade with France's enemy, the British Empire. The Tsar realized Russia needed this trade for its economy. But for Napoleon, this was the final straw. The French emperor began crafting a daring plan. The following year, he was going to invade Russia. Napoleon did not make the decision lightly. He knew it would be a challenge. For months, he planned and strategized. I am about to embark on the greatest and most difficult enterprise I've ever attempted. But what has begun must be carried through, he said. Napoleon planned to be in and out of Russia quickly. He believed the war would last about 1 month. To do this, he gathered the largest army Europe had ever seen. It was Napoleon's Grande Armée. In French, this translates to the Great Army. The troops came from 20 different nations. There were French, German, Italian, Polish, Swiss, Dutch, Spanish, and many other soldiers. They all came together, both willingly and unwillingly, to make the daring march into Russia. In June 1812, the invasion had begun. Over 500,000 soldiers crossed the Niemen River into Russian territory. They brought 150,000 horses and 30,000 wagons full of food and supplies with them. The army was so large, it took 5 hours for all of the men to get over the river. Napoleon stood inside a tent, watching his enormous army cross the water. 5 years ago, he had been at this very river, signing a peace treaty with Alexander. How the times had changed. Mighty as it was, the Grande Armée struggled in those first few weeks. It chased after the Russian army, hoping to engage in battle. but the Russians ran and burned fields of crops behind them. This would later be referred to as scorched earth. The burnt crops meant there was no food left for the French army. The summer heat and thunderstorms made the march even more difficult. Wagons carrying supplies struggled to reach the men, getting stuck in the muddy roads. The French also encountered Russia's Cossacks. These highly skilled horsemen darted in and out of the forest, attacking and sabotaging their supply wagons. By July, many men had died from exhaustion or illness, or they had deserted the army. The war wasn't going according to Napoleon's plan. In fact, it felt like it hadn't even really begun. A month had passed and no major battle even happened. Finally, in August, the Grande Armée had its first real test. The soldiers made their way towards Smolensk, one of Russia's oldest cities, to meet the Russian army. A battle began as the French tried to take over the city. Cannons fired into Smolensk, destroying its historic walls and setting the city on fire. The Russians fought back, but the French pushed into the city. Soldiers battled each other for hours as fires burned around them. By the end, the French and Russians lost thousands of men, and one of Russia's oldest cities, Smolensk, was in ruin. But the war wasn't over, and Napoleon had to decide what to do next. It was now the end of August, and the days were getting shorter. Should we wait in Smolensk until the winter is over and start again next year? Napoleon wondered. He looked down at his map. They were so close to Moscow, one of Russia's prize cities. If the Grande Armée could take Moscow, Napoleon thought, surely that would mean an end to this war. He decided not to stay in Smolensk. He commanded the army to move forward. They would try and take Moscow. The exhausted soldiers marched on, stopping just outside a village called Borodino, where the Russian army was waiting. The French took their position on the hills and small valleys near the village. In the distance, they could see the Russian weapons shining in the sun. "Soldiers!" Napoleon shouted. "The battle is at hand which you have so long desired. Henceforth the victory depends on yourselves. Let your countrymen say of you all, 'He was in the great battle under the walls of Moscow!'" The first shots were fired just as the sun rose in the sky. The Grande Armée's cannons boomed across the countryside. The Battle of Borodino had begun. Thousands of soldiers ran forward with their bayonets raised. Cannons from both sides fired into the chaos. Horses and men spilled onto the battlefield, stumbling through the smoke and the dirt. By the afternoon, the Russians began to retreat, but the battle was far from over. "Soldiers!" one of the French colonels shouted. "Now is the time!" Napoleon remained at the headquarters, away from the front lines. He shifted anxiously in his chair as he received news from the battle. His advisors could see the exhaustion on his face. Every decision he made could change the course of the campaign. By 5 p.m., the soldiers barely had enough energy to keep going. As the sun began to set, the cannons slowly stopped, and finally, all was quiet. Napoleon told his men they would continue to fight in the morning, but they awoke to surprising news. The Russians had left. Napoleon walked through the battlefield on horseback, looking at the devastation. All around him, he saw the bodies of soldiers, many wounded and many more dead. The French army lost nearly 30,000 men, and the Russians lost even more, about 45,000. The Battle of Borodino would be the bloodiest day during the Napoleonic Wars.
Hi friends, are you enjoying today's episode? I'd like to take a quick break from the story to tell you about another great place to learn about the past. Honest History creates magazines and books for kids that are filled with fun stories and activities that bring history to life. From pirates to spies to great inventions and so much more, you'll learn about interesting people, places, and events from around the world that made history. Created for kids ages 6 through 12, you can sign up and receive new adventures delivered straight to your doorstep every quarter. Just visit honesthistory.co. That's honesthistory.co to sign up today. Oh, and here's a special offer for our podcast listeners. Use code ANYTIMENOW for 10% off. Again, that special code is ANYTIMENOW. Okay, let's get back to the story.
With no sign of the Russian army, Napoleon led his army towards Moscow. On September 15, 1812, the Grande Armée marched into the city victorious, but they did not get the greeting they were expected. The city was strangely quiet. Where are all the people? The soldiers wondered. As it turned out, almost all the citizens had already left the city. In the distance, Napoleon saw smoke billowing up into the sky. Flames flashed from behind the buildings. He had an awful feeling in the pit of his stomach. The Russians were setting their city on fire. They would rather burn it than let the French take it. Mountains of lead, rolling flames, Napoleon remembered, like immense waves of the sea. Over the next few days, the fires ravaged the city. When the flames finally died down, much of Moscow had been destroyed. Napoleon and his army weren't able to get as many supplies from the ruined city as they had hoped. By now, he had lost many soldiers in battle, many others to disease, and more would be lost to hunger. But the emperor was certain the war would be over soon. After the capture of Moscow, he believed Russia would surrender. That morning, the emperor sat down to write a letter to Alexander. "I wage war against your majesty without animosity," Napoleon wrote. "A note from you before or after the last battle would have stopped my march." He told Alexander about the fires in Moscow and hoped that they would agree to peace. He sent the letter to the Tsar's palace in St. Petersburg. Napoleon waited days and days, but no letter came back. After a month, he had to face the truth. Alexander did not want to negotiate. The war would continue. Perhaps the Russian ruler knew that the Grande Armée was not as great as it once was. He also knew that winter was coming. And Napoleon knew this too. His men began to feel a chill in the autumn air. In October, they glanced up and saw the white flakes fluttering down through the sky, the very first snowfall. On October 19th, the Grande Armée began its march out of Moscow. Napoleon decided to retreat. Heavy rains turned the roads into mud and the tired men pushed on. Napoleon told them to head south to the warmer parts of Russia, but this plan soon fell to pieces. Cossacks attacked at every turn, and the Russian army was not far behind. Fighting broke out in a town outside Moscow. Although the French won this battle, Napoleon feared the Russians would attack again. He decided to change the course and travel back north, the way they came all those months ago. This would prove to be a deadly decision. The Emperor and his Grande Armée retraced their steps back through the burnt countryside. They crossed the battlefield of Borodino, haunted by the souls of their fallen comrades. As they marched, the temperatures continued to drop. They stumbled through the snow and the ice. Their feet and fingers were numb from the cold, and their eyes burned from the harsh sunlight as it reflected off the white snow. It was so cold their breath froze in the air. Hungry and exhausted, the men left their guns at the side of the road. They were too tired to carry them. Many others stopped listening to their commanders and broke off from the army. They were no longer fighting to win. They were fighting to survive. Along the way, the Grande Armée was ambushed by the Russian army. With each attack, Napoleon lost more and more men. "It is beginning to be very serious," Napoleon said. It was becoming clear that invading Russia had been a huge mistake. The Grande Armée was now approaching the Berezina River. It was the end of November, and Napoleon expected the river to be frozen. But when the men marched closer, they could hear the rush of water. To their terror, the river was not frozen. How would they get across it? Napoleon received more bad news. The Russian army was closing in, and if they didn't cross the river soon, they would be trapped. Napoleon's engineers quickly began building bridges over the freezing water. They worked day and night, shivering in the cold of the icy river. Many of the engineers would not survive. But 24 hours later, the bridges were completed. The Grande Armée began its dangerous journey over the shaky bridges. Many more lives would be lost during these final moments. As the Russian army moved closer, people flooded the bridges. Some of them fell off and tried to swim through the freezing water. In the morning, the engineers burned the bridges to stop the Russians from following them. some of the soldiers were stuck on the wrong side, unable to cross. They would be left to fight the Russians alone. Napoleon's Grande Armée, which had once been 600,000 strong, was now less than 100,000 soldiers. News soon reached Napoleon that there was trouble back home. On December 5th, he jumped on his horse and raced back to Paris, leaving his army behind. A few days later, the exhausted soldiers crossed over the Niemen River, the place where the invasion had begun just 6 months earlier. And it was now very clear Napoleon's invasion of Russia had failed. For many historians, this marked the beginning of the emperor's downfall. Napoleon would never be able to raise such a large army again. And soon, the rest of Europe turned against him. The empire was failing. As more and more wars broke out, Napoleon was forced to admit defeat. In 1814, he was exiled to a small island off the coast of Italy, the island of Elba. He was an emperor no more. Napoleon blamed the Russian winter for his failed invasion. "The winter laid the weight of a terrible calamity upon my army," he remembered, "and in a few nights everything changed." But it was more than just the snow and the ice. Napoleon had made the biggest mistake a commander could make. He misjudged his enemy. During those long 6 months, Alexander and the Russian army would not surrender, and Napoleon Bonaparte would have to return home defeated.
Welcome back! What did you think of today's adventure? We hope you learned something new. Be sure to share the story with your friends and family, and use what you've learned today to go out there and make a positive impact on history yourself. That's all for now, but if you want to learn more about important and amazing stories from the past, be sure to subscribe to Honest History Magazine, where you'll discover stories from around the world. Thanks for listening. This episode was narrated by Randall Lawrence and written by Heidi Coburn. Production was led by Robot Pirate Media. To learn more about Honest History, visit us at honesthistory.co and follow along for updates on social media.